Benediction of Wind. On a benediction of wind, they watched the cranes leave, and their feelings reached out to each other like the minds of migratory birds communing. Above them, the sky, abundant, would stop at nothing. He turned to her, and she said, "Jettison everything." Oh, how little time we have, and what will be left of us when we leave? A house on a hill, some wood smoke? Don't laugh, he said. Life is a rare vase carried by a child. As she laughed, tossing his most trusted fears like pennies into the sea. He watched the tide recede, leaving her ankles, her toes. Wash the axle grease of now from your hands, she said. Take hold. Together we shall strike out for the northernmost territories of love. He watched the tide come back in. Like the cranes, he asked, like the wild geese? Yes.
All right. Welcome to another episode of Poets in Montana. You've just been listening to Charles Finn, who's reading from his new collection with Barbara Michelman on a Benediction of Winds, which is a beautiful book, man.
Thank you.
It is a beautiful book. Beautiful in what we just heard, and then beautiful in these images of Barbara's in here.
Sure, yeah, and just to note, it's sadly Barbara couldn't be here. We had hoped that she was, but there's been a family emergency, so
yeah,
she couldn't make it today.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah,
we wish her well.
Right, appreciate it. Yeah.
And you've been on tour with this book?
A little bit, just started. Couple date here last month at Fact and Fiction for the launch, and then we're I live in Havre, so we're sort of trying to hit eastern Montana first, and a bunch of places out there. Back here for the book festival, but we'll be out in Billings come the end of the month. So
cool.
And then maybe points west, all the way to the coast, Bellingham, Seattle, Portland, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And the book was the publisher is in
Seattle, Chatwin Press.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
So, and they did a nice job with it. Really happy with the product.
Yeah, it is beautiful. On reading it again, it's like, well, of course it's a collection of poetry, which I always disparage and make fun of because that's who I am. Mm-hmm. But it's like, wow, that would make a great coffee table book. A huge hardback where you could, where all those pictures could have a whole page, right?
So we contemplated that, right? We talked about it amongst ourselves, Barbara and I, when we were first just had the idea for the book. And then when we approached the publisher and Chatwin Press picked it up and said they wanted to do it, and we had conversations with them about what would the format be.
Right.
And that the problem would be the coffee table book is it's going to be, say, $60, $80 or whatever.
Right.
A lot to produce, and then how many people are going to buy that? Versus something smaller, more affordable. You get it out to more people.
Right.
So that was the compromise, was how can we best showcase her photography without going too small. So this is what we hit on.
And that I guess the whole coffee table book format favors photographic imagery as opposed to poetry. Right. They're just like they're beautiful together, but it is it's
trying to strike that balance. So
there is money in the one end, and there's not a lot in the other.
Yeah, well, there's probably not in either end, but
yeah, you're
for
right
us,
about that.
Yeah.
So I just sort of a background. Let me do this real quick. Let me read this short bio on Charles. Charles Finn is a former editor of the literary and fine arts magazine High Desert Journal, where our friend Cheryl Nothey is a poetry editor.
Yep.
Yes, and author of Wild Delicate Seconds, 29 Wildlife Encounters, OSU Press. He's also co-editor with Kim Stafford of the forthcoming textbook, The Art of Revision, 21 U.S. Poets on Process, Craft, and Revision from Bloomsbury. His essays, poems, and articles have appeared in a wide variety of journals, newspapers, magazines, and anthologies around the West and beyond. He lives in Havre, Montana with his wife Joyce and their cat Lutza. Did I say it right?
Lusa.
Lusa,
Yeah.
Lusa,
Yeah.
Lusa. Is that a particular spelling from linguistically, or?
So Lusa's a rescue cat, and when we first got her in the animal shelter, her name was Ashes. She's sort of black and white and gray. And Joyce is from Malawi, and in her native tongue, Chichewa, Ashes is Pulusa.
Okay.
So we sort of just shortened that to Lusa.
Lusa.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
So.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'm a cat man too. Are you a cat poet too? Does Lusa show up and?
No, she always makes the bio, but I haven't written any cat poem. I've written one prose poem that's about her.
Yeah.
Actually, now that I think about it, it's not published.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Right.
in.
Your first book, Wild. I don't know if this is your first book or not.
Yes,
but
it was, yeah.
Wild Delicate Seconds
Yeah.
is an interesting collection of just these animal portraits, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
And you referred to them as small essays or prose poems, whatever.
Micro essays.
Yeah,
a lot of people
micro-essays.
consider them prose poems, but they were not written, in my mind at least, as prose poems versus the ones in
Right.
Benediction. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Do you want to share anything from
Sure.
that
Sure.
with
yeah.
us? I mean, just to give us a taste, and then we'll move back into
Yeah,
the poetry from
Yeah,
Benediction.
Sure. It's always hard to pick which one, because I really like so many of them. Did you have a favorite?
Well, the one I just finished on, the last one I read, which I just loved, was Red Shafted Flicker.
Okay. Yep. That was the very first one that launched the book.
Really?
Right. Yeah. So, do you know what page that's on?
It is on page 38.
Okay. Yeah, so I wanted this to be, I always wanted to be sort of Annie Dillard, Barry Lopez kind of thing when I was first
Right.
Starting out. But I didn't like researching. I didn't want to have all the background and the natural history. Each of these encounters, I pared it down just to that 10 seconds or a minute and a half where I was with the animal and observing the animal, and tried to just get to that nugget of whatever might have really been that experience. So these are very condensed, tight little micro essays.
Right.
So Red Shafted Flicker. There is a calmness birds bring to people, a steadiness they impart to even the most frenzied of lives. After a long winter, their cheery voices are like a tonic we drink with our ears, and the soft flutter of their wings, the quiet mutterings they speak to each other, are like reminders of a distant, gentler time. For the chickadee to land on one's finger is like having the very thing of nature visit the self. Tiny claws dig into the skin, blood and bone rest on our own. There is the inquisitive cock of its head. Such moments leave one feeling slightly askew, as if a part of us was missing or not quite filled. I have both witnessed and felt such an epiphany in the company of birds, their gentle cooings massaging a loneliness I wasn't aware that I had. It was late afternoon. I'd come inside from chopping wood. Taking off my boots, I was startled when a large bird rose in the back of a chair. It flew directly in front of me, and I cringed when it smashed into a window. Hardly had it dropped with a thump than it picked itself up, flew in the opposite direction, and slammed into another. It was a red-shafted flicker, a member of the woodpecker family. Large, handsome birds here, smoke gray and thundercloud blue, a summer storm with orange tail feathers burning through. They're often seen tapping holes in the cedar fascias of homes, and in the air have a distinctive patch of white on the rump and a seductive, undulating, roller coaster-like flight. Quickly crossing the few feet that separated us, I threw a towel over its shoulders and picked the bird up in my hands. It was an adult male, A comma of rescue orange was splashed on each cheek. There was a crescent-shaped bib of black under the chin, and below it a spectacular black and white polka dot chest. As I smoothed this chest with my thumb, the flicker opened its beak but did not make a sound. Then he cranked his head side to side, carving figure eights in the air. When his eye lit on mine, it stayed. The feathers around it were soft, gray, a black pupil resting there like a drop of pure oil. I was looking into a minute disk of Japanese lacquer, a chip of ebony broken off from a moonless night sky. It was a great boon is all I am going to tell you, to hold that bird and forget my place among things. Many times I've come across wild animals in the woods. I know the heightened sense of awareness such encounters can bring. With the flicker, there was a great calmness. It spread through the room. Lauren Isley said, "One does not meet oneself until one catches the reflection from an eye other than human." I nodded and stood. With a flicker, I walked outside into the sunshine. I spent 30 seconds holding that bird. I don't think I can be blamed for holding on a little too long, a little too tightly. They were wild, delicate seconds, like the ones that make up childhood. Then I opened my hands.
Nice.
So,
Yeah.
there's some, not quite echoes, but things I've kind of stolen from other poets and writers in that one.
Mm-hmm.
And the last line, if you remember Elizabeth Bishop's The Fish,
Mm-hmm.
where she catches the fish, and,
Right.
and then at the end
Right.
and I let it go.
Right.
This was the same thing where just,
Right.
yeah, so.
Was it was the incident itself true, basically?
Oh yeah, these are all completely, true,
Right.
nonfiction,
Right.
without embellishments or anything
Right.
of that sort.
Poetic license.
Right. Yeah. So I mean,
I'm not so sure Elizabeth could say the same about
yeah,
that.
probably not. Probably not. No. But no, I came home and Flicker was there and
Yeah.
caught it and just held it. And
When I
took it
read
outside.
that, and of course the title comes from the
Yeah.
ending of that, which makes sense that
Yeah.
would have been the poem, and sort of the lead into it with the focus on that chickadee, and then all of a sudden the memory and of the flicker. And I have flickers. I had flickers all over my
Yeah, of
place,
course, yeah, yeah.
and because they're everywhere, but they love hammering on the flashing and the
Yeah.
transformers and
Yeah.
the digging the ants out of the sidewalk and all the stuff they
Yeah.
do. But I was reminded of a story a friend of mine told me about a feral cat getting stuck in his house that
Oh.
way, and he couldn't get it. He couldn't. He tried to open all the windows, and he couldn't get it to find the right way out.
Yeah.
And the thing just tore the.
Oh my
It
God.
was a nightmare
Yeah.
story of that kind of a wild animal in your
Yeah,
house.
yeah.
Must have scared the bejesus out of you there trying to.
Oh.
Going into the windows and
Yeah, I thought it was really going to hurt itself, right? Because
Yeah.
it really flew and smashed into the one, and luckily I was able to grab that towel and toss it over him. But
right.
yeah,
Right, like
Yeah.
the birds get the drunken birds on the mountain ash berries, right?
yeah, yeah. Well, in that same cabin, I had black bears break into it and just maul the whole interior,
Oh,
and
God.
had a skunk that came in one time, and I had to try and get it out. So this is all in British Columbia. I lived there for 10 years in a small backwoods
okay.
cabin. So for most of it, not the whole time.
Well, along those historical sort of pathway lines, where did you come from? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Vermont. Moved there when I was 2. Family's from Boston, and spent my whole youth until I went off to Syracuse University there, and was always back home. And then traveled quite a bit, Europe and Asia, lived in Japan for 3 years, and finally came west in 1991, I think, and have never looked back.
Yeah, yeah.
I love Vermont. I like the East Coast, but I don't think I'd ever want to live there. Yeah. Yeah.
Were you always attracted to the nature, to the outdoors, to back there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I say that I grew up half feral, right? Because back in the day, like kids, you just leave the house after breakfast and screen door slams and you're not back till the call for dinner, and you're just running around the woods, or you're biking through town, or you're playing by the brook, not a creek, not a crick. Back east, it's a brook.
Right.
And so, yeah, and your parents had no idea where you were. It's like, I'm going to Mike's, you know, but you were all over hell and gone. So we were always outside doing something, catching frogs or climbing trees.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. It's a great way to grow up.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, I
talk
feel
about
really blessed.
Fueling the imagination, you know, and learning how to get along with people.
Right, yeah.
You know,
but one of those things is like, being bored, the benefits of being bored.
Yeah.
And you have to come up with something, so you use your imagination, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think kids often get enough downtime where everything's supervised, right? Their parents have them do this class and that soccer game and everything.
Well, and then the current generation, for better or worse, has been, you know, burdened with these handheld devices, and everybody's in there, you know, in this constant feed and so it's addictive.
Oh, it is.
Oh, totally. You know, like anything, and so they spend less time. I remember my kids. We grew up. I was living in Pablo, and because I was teaching up there on the reservation, and so my kids grew up there playing in the yard in the dirt pile and whatnot, and they all wanted Nintendos and all that kind of thing, and I was like, no, you can't.
Yeah.
Because I knew they were going over to their friend's house and playing it, and I didn't want to just continue the operation at my place, so they had to play outside, but they were great at it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Well, read us something from Benediction on the Benediction of Wind.
Okay.
Something you choose.
All right. Again, it's a shame we can't project the images.
Yeah, totally.
And so in here, so what I've really experimenting with prose poems. The first time that I've really attempted it were in this book. And I created two characters. There's a he and a she, which they're not based on anyone at all, but simply a vehicle for me to get away from the first person I, right? So sometimes these read almost like little fiction, short fiction. But here's one. This is local. It's called Colors, Leaving Potomac. So I have a cabin out in Potomac, like I told you. So this was just one of those mornings after rain, and the colors were just so crisp and clear. And so this is what happened. So I was driving down the road, and of course, and I have to pull over and I take some notes, and then I drive and I get about to Bear Creek, and I pull over again. I start writing some more. So that's the way work often comes to me. Colors, Leaving Potomac. In the morning, 3 sandhill cranes, gray against a gray sky, and the shorn blonde hayfields below them. Black Angus cattle in the far field, and a red barn slouching against hills of tamarack lit like candles, incandescent, burning between stands of white pine, fir, and ponderosa, wet from last night's rain. In the ditch, cattails gone to seed, and a red fox hunting nose down along the barbed wire fence where spider webs hang. Gone the red-winged blackbirds, the yellow-headed blackbirds, the tiny mountain bluebirds, but still the magpies, yin-yang as always, and the red-tailed hawks, and the 2 great blue herons dressed as smoke signals spearfishing down by the pond. Turning off the dirt road, she reaches over and touches his cheek. We need the great mystery, she said, as equally as they need us. He places a hand on her knee. Out the window, a Rorschach of ravens, and the great master class of the river, all the colors of autumn moving on the green billboard of its surface.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that you are much safer than I spoke to Mark Bodine about a similar sort of problem when you're driving and you're wanting to write things down, and you know he's like trying to write things down while he's driving. And I mean, that just reminded me of the times that I didn't take the time to make notes. Those images that needed to be, because when you try to recall,
Oh, I've lost so many poems that way because
Yeah.
I didn't do that. And
Right.
I'll repeat over and over, like 10 times in my head. When I get home, I'm going to write.
Right.
Repeat it. And sure enough, you get home and it's gone, or it's just half there, and it doesn't have any of the juice.
Right.
So yeah, I've learned to pull over and
Right. Well,
try and get it down.
my friend, Dave Thomas,
Yeah.
the poet here in Missoula, we call him the walking poet, but he always
Good.
carries that little spiral notebook in his
Uh-huh.
pocket, and he's
Yeah.
always,
I've dictated into my phone a couple times.
Yeah.
I've tried that.
yeah.
But,
Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah. So,
Well, what else?
what else? Boy, you ask all these hard questions, Mark.
Yeah. Dealer's choice.
Dealer's choice. Well, this is a little bit of a longer one, if you don't mind.
No,
It's
that'd be great.
Memoir of a Raven.
Mm-hmm.
So after Delicate Seconds came out, I was like, what's my next book going to be?
Mm-hmm.
And I had an idea to do a memoir of a raven, and I thought maybe I'd do a memoir of a oak tree, and I picked two other like things, maybe a memoir of a river if I could, I was trying to get all four elements somehow, or four different things you wouldn't normally have a memoir about, which was going to require a whole lot of research into that kind of thing. And again, I sort of fell down on that side of things, but I had already knew quite a bit about ravens just from reading various things about them. So this is what I wanted to be, a 20,000 word memoir, and then have four of those collected into a book. It's like 1,000 words, and that's it. So, and this has some of my favorite lines I've ever written in it. Memoir of a Raven. The wind is high again today, a long, steady pulse out of the south. From my perch at the end of the valley, I'm able to look out on everything I know. The green spires of firs and the thick trunks of the cedars, the beetle-killed pines and their long needles brooming the wind. My brothers inscribing the wind with their dark arabesques. As for me, I push off with barely a wing beat, following the river downstream, dragging my shadow over the green avenue of its water, its cobbles of stones and cylinders of fish. Let it be known that I am partial to the jazz songs of coyotes and the drum solos of grouse, that I can hear on the coldest nights the sound of a nut turning over in a hungry squirrel's mind. I was born in Yellowstone in what you call the Year of the Fires, and I was present for the reintroduction of wolves. There will be willows again, I said that day, and a beaver. In celebration, I flew over the whole toy box that is Yellowstone, its clockwork geysers and Kodachrome hot pools, the hard-thinking bears and slow-motion bison. I was reminded once again of the quick silver minds of the elk and the grace of all things. For the record, I have been a thief and beggar. I have a weakness for shiny things and a penchant for sewing off. One of my favorite things to do is fly to the park in Livingston where the old men play chess and listen to the radio. Perhaps you've seen me, rooting for the Black Queen, or hanging upside down from a telephone wire. Look, Mom, 1 foot. It always draws a crowd. But I ramble. Time is running out, and I admit I wasted my afflictions. Yet there's nothing like drinking out of a fresh, grisly print to confirm that your life is on the right track. So I remind you that the days come and go, but mostly they go. It's the minutes you must collect. The armature of your life will drag you along, even as the plowshare of the days turns its one long furrow into forever. My advice is keep pace, and don't let up. As confused as you might be in life, as conflicted, in death there is no doubt. Find an elk carcass and look inside. No confusion there. I love the world for this, for the certainty that exists in us all. I must go now. All this talking has made me hoarse. I have a squirrel in my throat, we say. So I will leave you with a few final thoughts, a few breadcrumbs of wisdom from a poor wind-tossed raven. Humility, please. You must practice harder. And happiness, dilate your life with joy. Meanwhile, take solace in the indifference of the world. It is its most abiding construction. Lastly, and this you must remember, write it down if you have to. The loons, they aren't laughing.
There you go. The voice of the raven.
Yeah.
Not a lot of research, but a lot of imagination.
Yeah. Well, they do hang upside down from one foot. That was something that I
Yeah.
learned through my reading.
Through your research?
Yeah. Just through basic reading about them and
Right.
going through bird books and things. But one of the the things about this book in particular is Barbara and I were very intent on having the poems and photographs work together but not be descriptions of one or the other, that there's room for interpretation, so that there's in her work and mine, there's a common sensibility, it seems, so they match very well, but we were very deliberate in picking which images went with which poem, and we didn't want them to be, literal interpretations of one or the other, but when you brought them together, it sort of created a third piece of art,
Right.
so to say. So
Right.
that was our whole intent with
Did
doing
she?
this.
Did she? For that particular poem, did she have a raven photograph, or did she go and get one?
No, she did have raven photographs for that
Yeah.
one. So that one's a little bit more literal, because it is, a couple pictures. There's 2 or 3 of the ravens there,
Right.
versus some of the ones that are not more. Well, they're more abstract in a way. But there's a link there, but it's not quite direct
Yeah.
and literal. So.
Yeah, and I think that's natural almost. I mean,
Yeah.
because we can find things in anything that, and I
Right.
think the similarities are always there
Yeah.
in ways, don't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And we wanted to allow room for the reader and viewer to make those links on their own without
Right.
it being a show and tell. So there's a conversation between her work and my work that create a third something or other. So.
Yeah. I was having, after we left here yesterday. I talked to Mark yesterday, Mark Bodine, and we went and had something to eat because it was lunchtime, and we were talking, and we were talking about that space that's in between the creator and the receiver, the artist or whatever, and that's really where the art lies, is in between there. It's that space in between. You don't know what it is,
Right.
because it's different for every person. Right?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
cool. I like that about
Yeah.
the whole experience, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we like to think, the poem is going to stand on its own, the photograph stands on its own, but put them together. And,
Right. Yeah. They become
Something
more
different.
powerful. That raven thing reminded me of. I remember sitting. It was on a break time or whatever. I'm just a guy I worked with, and we were talking about stuff, and he was talking about watching this raven, and on a lunch break, and it was like one of those little tiny Lay's potato chip bags, It was like laying on the ground, and the raven was going over there, and he was flicking that thing and trying to flick it, and to get the stuff out of it, right? And he couldn't get the dang thing. There was a kind of a tear flap on top, and it wasn't working for him. So he just kept kicking it around and flicking at it. Finally, he said that raven looked around on the ground, and he grabbed a stick, and he stuck that stick in that bag. And he put it up in the air, and he shook the chips out.
Well, they're incredibly intelligent
Tools,
birds. Yeah.
man.
Well, they use tools, right?
Exactly.
And they problem solve. There's all kinds of stories of ravens, in particular crows.
Right.
All
So
the corvids.
it's not that great of a leap to give that raven consciousness, human consciousness.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, they're really intelligent animals.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, anything else that you want to chat about? Or, did you have anything you wanted to talk about in this moment? Or?
In relation to this, there were more than a few that I worked from Barbara's photographs. So she sent me, some images, and I was like, wow, I love that one. And I would create a poem from that.
Right.
Oftentimes, we'd get together, and I'd send her a poem, and she would find 2 or 3 or 4 images that worked well, and we talked about which ones we thought were going to be best.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a real joy to work with her because it was so easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we found the one that worked, we were both like, yes, that's the one. And leading up to it, it's like, well, that one's okay, that does work, and but we knew it wasn't quite right.
Right.
So again, it was a very easy, fun, and nice collaboration with her.
Yeah.
And she's got a great eye. I mean, her images are not sort of your cookie cutter big, beautiful sunset with a rainbow or this or that.
Right.
Very smart and intelligent way that she uses her camera and what she sees out of it. Talking with some other photographers, and they'll be out on a shoot perhaps with her, and they'll come back, and Barbara will show them, what she photographed, and like, my God, I was standing right beside you, and I didn't see that, or I framed it differently, and what you did was fantastic.
Yeah. Right.
So she has that skill.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, you succeeded wildly. The two of you succeeded wildly, I would say, with that, just that effort, because I think it works just wonderfully.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful book, and her images are stunning, and the poems are beautiful, and they work incredibly well with the images. One of the things that, I mean, I'm not a photographer. I did amateur, photography for a while and spent a little darkroom time and really enjoyed it. I love framing things. I love to watch movies. I mean, it's just a sense of composition, I think, that we have, and focus, because we're people that like to observe and focus on things. And but I just thought that, like, the depth of field, you know what I mean? The three-dimensionality that you feel in these images of hers in the book is incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a true art.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, it's like 3D almost. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I see things that I think, oh, that would make a great photograph, but I don't have the technical skill to pull it off. I mean, you can take your photo with your phone and it looks fine, but it's not. It doesn't raise itself to the level of art.
Yeah,
as such.
totally.
So
She's, you were lucky to find her, and she was lucky to find you, and do this thing together. It's a beautiful book.
Thank you.
Well, you want to share another poem?
Sure.
Or is there anything else that you want to share, reading-wise, or?
No. Another poem would be fine. I got. I started out again wanting to write these longer essays, and I've done a whole bunch that are local to Missoula, like I was telling you about, going out to Harold's,
right?
For Dick Hugo's old stomping grounds and that kind of thing. But I think that might be a little long for this. I think I'll read one of the ones that I worked off her photograph. So it's a shame we can't.
Well, which page? Maybe I'll try to put it up here. I don't know if Ron can focus on it or not, but
maybe. Boy, that one might be hard to. Yeah, it's 39, Success, and it's a lot of these are landscape photographs that she's taken. Big vistas, and then other close-ups. But this is one of some train tracks. I'm pretty sure this is here in Missoula somewhere. Maybe on the north side. But when I saw this, I was instantly taken with it because I could smell the creosote and I could remember.
Oh yeah, that's totally on. That's that. Chris Latreille has a writing space over in that building.
Oh, he does?
Yeah.
Oh, Chris is a great writer.
Yeah. He's going to be on here eventually.
I hope so. I hope so. But so I used to, we were talking about being half feral, right? And we were always playing down on the train tracks, a little hometown, like 4,000 people, and putting pennies and nickels and things on that, and just walking up and down the track. So this really reminded me of that. And so this is the poem that came out of seeing this particular photograph. And again, it features these two people who I just, invented.
Right.
It's called Success. It was the time of the hummingbirds, the lilacs, of the sky going nowhere behind the old sawmill. There was a small talk of rain on the metal roof, and an odor of creosote and hot steel rising from the tracks. They would meet in the afternoons, She combing her hair with her fingers, he drawing circles in the dirt with a stick. Already they were old pros, idling, passing time back and forth like a bottle. It was easy to see they would one day marry, grow old together, learn to turn the seconds between lightning and thunder into forever. The first time they met, he asked her to tell him a story, and she pointed to a broken window and made the shape of a heart. It was the very next day she found him 2 stories up on a homemade ladder, replacing the glass. So I just remembered, I had wanted to do, so I had these characters and I wanted to do their whole life together. They were going to be kids, and then they were going to meet, and then they were going to, so that was going to be a thread. I was going to try and make, 50 or 60 of these short poems that would,
Right.
be a story all in themselves. And at some point I abandoned that, but
You might get back to it.
I could.
Yeah. It's a good idea.
Yeah, like in Delicate Seconds and in here, these are really just vehicles for me to talk about and say things that I want to say, right?
Yeah.
And most of what it boils down to paying attention to the small things, to the caterpillar or the ripple of water, going down a stream, or just sitting, passing time back and forth like a bottle, right? Just that idea of slowing down. Right. And getting away from the hive mind and busyness of our days. So.
Being present.
Yeah. So that's basically that's what I write about. One way or the other, it all sort of boils down to that same general idea.
That's pretty much ground for poetry, I'd say.
Yeah.
I mean, and not that it's not ground for longer works, but definitely it's what poetry seems to be mostly all about.
Right. Do you have a theme yourself that you're always going back to?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's just me, and sometimes I try not to even think about it. I try to just be myself, whatever that may be, in response to whatever I seem like I have to respond to. I mean, it's more of a compelling type of thing, and in the end, I kind of feel like you just have to trust myself to just be myself, whatever the hell that is. Right. I don't know what it is. Yeah. I don't understand anything, but I just try to be true to the moment, to myself, I guess, I don't know.
There's a working class background, and that comes into a lot of your poetry.
No, I mean, I could say probably come up with a list of things in response to that, I suppose, along those lines. Yeah. Just because that's who I am, I guess. And not only that aspect of it, but then this quest to know. Knowledge, and so I mean, it's like, as much as that whole working class thing, I've got my Wheaton Van Lines T-shirt on till today, because whoops, Jesus, I just knocked that microphone all over the place. But from that aspect of life, that working class mentality. But the other thing is, I spent a whole lot of time in schools, and the odd thing is I just was going to write something for the State of the Arts thing, and it's because they're going back to school in the fall. It's a fall issue. My little thing that I decide to write has to do with the fact that, and I don't know where you fit into this model, but I always dreaded going to school.
Oh yeah.
I never. I always. Sundays were like a waste, because it was just like, oh no, I've got to go back to school. I mean, I was of that. I always wanted the freedom of not having to be on the spot for somebody to say, you should do this and this and this and this, like going to work, right?
Right. Yeah. That aspect of going to work, I've never liked.
Yeah.
And luckily, I've worked so little in my life, it's ridiculous. But I loved going to school, elementary school, high school in particular. And I never, because it wasn't really, the classes weren't very hard.
Yeah.
Right? And I didn't apply myself to get straight A's, but it was easy to get, B's and in a few ways sprinkled in. But I just had fun hanging out with my friends. Yeah. We were just joking around all day long, and then playing sports after after school, and it was just fun. It was just I was just socializing the whole time.
Yeah.
And then you go to class once in a while, and
Yeah, and I of course I did that. I mean, once I got there, I it was fine.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to go.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have to go and you know, it's just like going to work. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. You got to be at work, and I of course I did that. But so I mean, I sort of saw the equation of that love-hate relationship that we can have with certain things. You know, I mean.
Well, that poem, the Success that I read, I mean, I've told this many times, but my definition of success came from my father, who was a small-town bureaucrat, Waterbury, Vermont, the town clerk, and he could walk to work, he'd walk back, and he'd come home, and I would think, this is the most boring job in the world. God, I mean, dog licenses and marriage licenses and looking up land deeds and whatever questions someone came in with. He'd come home, we'd sit at the dining room table, and he would say, I love my job. Oh, I love going to work. And he'd tell us some story about whoever wandered in. Right. And I compared that and contrasted it with my best friend, or some of my friends whose fathers were making a hell of a lot more money than my dad. Right. But they'd be Sunday grumbling, oh, God damn, I got to go to work tomorrow. Blah, 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 blah. Right. And it's like, well, my dad wins. He's happy. He loves his job. Right. So from early on, my definition of success was enjoy what you do, be happy. Exactly. Which meant I've taken a vow of poverty to become a poet, right? Right. And never have any money. Right. But that was it. And there were any number of jobs where I was like, I'm not enjoying this. I don't like this. Right. I'm leaving. Goodbye. Yeah. And would just not show up or just quit. Right. Like, I'm going home early. Because I want to go read and write and sit by the river. Exactly. So yeah, and that I realized that at some point in terms of, you know, in having a job, was that the money wasn't as obviously you were there because you needed money. I needed money. Right. You know, I have a family and a wife and kids, and I needed money. But at the same time. Money wasn't as important as the people I was around. Sure. If I didn't like the people I was around, I'm not going to be here. I'm going to find a job where I can tolerate who I have to be with all day long, and we can get along. And then it was just a matter of being present again. Just saying, no, you can't worry about hating this or not. You just need to focus and appreciate where you're at. Yeah. And the people you're around. Sure. Yeah. Well, I've done a lot of sort of manual labor. That's sort of construction work and my own carpentry and all. But so that being around people that you like, I worked for quite a few years for Heritage Timber, Gary Delp, who's out in Potomac, and the work. I mean, taking down these buildings, it's hard, physical labor. Even when you're young, I mean, it's tough. Yeah. And it's dirty. You're just always, you're filthy by the end of the day. You're hot and you're sweaty and you're covered in dust and pigeon shit and everything else because you're prying boards off. But I love the people. Right. I love the crew that we had, and we had so much fun. The work was so damn hard, but we just laughed about it because you couldn't do anything else. Exactly. And we had a good time doing it. Yeah. So. Yeah. That's the payoff of that kind of a situation. Yeah. And I loved it. That's why I did it, I guess, for as long as I did it. That and just routine and money was just the fact that you really got along with these people. Yeah. It was fun in that regard, Yeah. Now, for writing, is it and we're writers, we're poets, it's what we like to do, but is it often, I mean, do you make yourself sit down like, okay, I got to put the time in? It's like, I'd rather go have a gin and tonic, but I'm going to sit here and. Exactly. And in terms of writing. Yeah, in terms of writing. Is it work? Do you look at it as work? And no. Discipline? No, it's. I mean, I guess, and there must be some part of my brain that is compelled to continue. I guess I don't know. Yeah. I don't. I just think that I sometimes think that my biggest problem and maybe my biggest blessing is I don't overthink shit. Yeah. I just go through the day. Right. I'm pretty easy. Right.
You know what I mean? And it's like I just enjoy what's going on around me, and I'm usually compelled to write a poem. I mean, usually I'm aware of shit, and it's just like, oh my God, that's a poem, or I'm compelled to write this down, or I haven't written anything in a week, or something like that, and I'm like, I know I need to write something, so I sit down, and just like, you know, the notes and stuff that you talked about taking, you know, we've been around forever, right? You've got these stacks of scribbled paper, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, sometimes I think, I haven't written anything in a while and nothing is jumping at me, and I'll go and I'll grab an old notebook, open it up,
and there's a little gem somewhere there,
and sometimes it's almost a whole damn poem. It's like, well, why didn't I use this? What I wrote this, and it's like, oh, I will get back to this or something or whatever, you know, and
You know, I had that stack of notebooks, and this is when I was in British Columbia, and I forget what, I was going to just clean up the yard. There were some broken sawhorses and this and that, so I started a little bonfire. And I was like, oh, you know, I'm going to chuck that thing on and this thing on, and it started to grow. And it was almost a manic phase I entered into, but I started just like, it's going to burn. If I haven't used this or that, it's like, it's going on the fire. And at one point, I was like, my journals. It's like, and I said, I got to do it. And I took that stack and I just tossed them on the fire. And the idea was, I don't want to rely on the past. And I knew I was going to regret it. I said, I know I'm going to regret this, but this is what's happening. This is a cleansing. It's a purge. Right. And so a lot of those journals went by the wayside.
Well, and I think invariably that's just going to happen. I mean, we're all going to wind up in the dustbin, the garbage chute anyway, along with everything we scribbled. But I guess I've been sort of stable enough because I've been married forever. You know, Pam and I got married when we were kids. And so we've been together, and so all the stuff that I've been scribbling at since I started in high school. Is that when you started, sort of taking yourself halfway seriously as a scribbler?
Well, yes and no. I knew I wanted to be a writer. I went to school for journalism, and I didn't like the kids in the program. They were ladder climbing, backstabbing bastards, right? So. And I I wanted to write my great American novel. I figured, well, at least I need a day job. But I never even attempted to work at a newspaper or anything. And it wasn't until I traveled overseas and come back that I found a way to not work a lot by not having water and running water and electricity, and got rid of my car and had a bicycle. Even through British Columbia winters, I could have time to write because I only had to work a week out of a month or one day a week. And that's when I began taking myself seriously as a writer. But I carved out a way that I could find time to do it. Other people, they work full-time jobs and they go home and they write all night or they get up early, but that was never me.
No, I'm not that energetic. I mean, I would try to write on weekends, and whenever I found time, when I felt like I needed to write something down, I found time to do it. But, you know, from the perspective of a poet, small bits of time. And, you know, and then that's a draft, and you can go back to it, and you can go back to it, and you can go back to it. But to be a novelist, to be a big palette writer, you do need to discipline yourself and have blocks of time. You know?
And like I said, I wanted to be the great American novelist, but I never had stories and characters in my head. It was always these snippets, these almost snapshots of something that grabbed me and I wanted to write about, but I could never expand it bigger. Just, I mean, the essays, a 5,000 words essay is the most I've ever worked up to. So this prose poem type length suits me.
I'm kind of on that same page. And I, you know, a lot of it I attribute to just lack of organization. I'm just not a very organized sort of person. I'm kind of a messy person. Well, this has been delightful, man. I'm glad that we were able to do this in person. And Charles Finn is kicking off the Montana Book Festival here in just a little bit.
Yep,
So this was
about an hour. Yep.
This is your warm up.
Right. Yeah. Thanks. I can use that. So I really appreciate you inviting me to do this. So it's really fun to talk with you and hang out a bit. So.
It is. It's our pleasure to have heard your poems and pick up a copy of On a Benediction of Wind with Charles and Barbara Michelman's photographs are incredible. Sorry we didn't see her today, but it's a great book.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So that's it for today. Join us next time for another episode of Poets in Montana. Thanks.
Got a lifetime filled with whiskey and short in the most of the road.